Legal cases, legal issues, legal matters. You're watching WFTV's Law Talk with anchor Christopher Heath and expert legal analyst, attorney Mark NeJame.
All right, let's talk about some of the current cases, issues, and legal matters that our viewers are talking about. Joining me today is legal analyst Mark NeJame of the NeJame Law Firm, and Boz Chavijan, who is of counsel for the NeJame Law Firm. And we're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, and this is an area that the law has rapidly evolved in the last 50 years to deal with a lot of these issues.
Well, 50 years, 40 years, 10 years, 5 years, 1 year. Last month.
Yeah.
It continues to evolve. And what used to be acceptable behavior is absolutely taboo now. And one cannot take the liberties, and this typically applies to men, that what was commonplace back in a certain day and age is no longer not only unacceptable, but illegal. And so the law speaks to this significantly. And it's all the more accelerated with the Me Too movement and the bad behavior of many men in the workplace, and now there are remedies, and they are significant, and they attach great liability. What used to be very common for people to meet and romanticize in the workplace can still happen, but there's constraints, there's limitations, there's boundaries, and when those boundaries get crossed, and they often do, we get so many calls on sexual harassment that there's the public, particularly women, but it's also men. There's a lot of times where there's a male-on-male situation, or a female-on-male happens as well, and those remedies need to be followed through.
And Boz, this is something, and Mark touched on it, you know, we mentioned 50 years, but it's been, I mean, every year it seems like we refine this a little bit more, because what used to be acceptable is not, and people just need to be aware of where those lines are, and they're not always black and white.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that's really important to remember about sexual harassment is it involves ultimately the imbalance of power. So we've always had in the workplace imbalance of power and people exploiting that. It's just that years ago people got away with it. And we've changed, we've evolved to say, wait a minute, just because somebody's your boss or supervisor does not give them the right to exploit and harass you. And so how do we train and educate people in the workplace, especially those in supervisory positions, on this is not acceptable. You're in a position of leadership and power. How do you refrain from acting in ways that cause great amount of trauma oftentimes to employees? And that's the other thing I just want to touch on is so many people in the workplace I find are being harassed sexually, a lot of women. But you know, it's a tough decision. A lot of them are single moms, they're just trying to make it. And so it's easier in their mind to say, you know what, I'll just put up with it so I keep my job. And these male offenders know that, and they exploit that. And I think it's really important, if you're in the workplace and you feel like you're being sexually harassed, even if you're wondering whether you should say something or not, talk to a lawyer. Get at least some options available so you can be empowered to make the decisions that you need to make that are best for you, and perhaps hold the employer accountable for this unacceptable conduct.
It's one of those things where, like, I think we all understand the quid pro quo of, I want this sexual favor from you and I'll give you this promotion. I think we can all identify that as 100% wrong. There's gray areas within this that people may not be aware of where those lines get drawn.
Without question. A lot of times you'll find that, like I can think of a case in our office that I handled, where a woman came to us and said, but it was consensual. Well, there was an imbalance of power, as Boz just talked about. You know, they were having what she, at least at the time, thought was consensual, but the reality of it is, does it affect her promotion? Does it affect her getting raises? Does it affect her potentially getting fired? Does it potentially get her ostracized in the workplace? All these things enter into it, that if she doesn't comply, then all of a sudden there's issues that surface. And oftentimes, all these only happen when there's a breakup. When they're together, everybody thinks it's good. They're spending some, usually in secret, they're having their relationship. But when there's a breakup, now what happens? Now all of a sudden, if there's a bad breakup, which is very common, now what does that person do? Now they are ostracized, as I mentioned before. They end up being mocked. They end up being ignored. There's a tension, there's hostility, which is a big issue in the workplace. Now all of a sudden all these issues come in there because an employer or somebody in a superior position had a relationship with somebody who was not in that position, and they were not on equal footing. And there's remedies for that.
And Boz, who does this fall on to kind of head this off? Is this an HR issue? Is this somebody in upper management? Or is this kind of everyone needs to be aware of it to a certain extent? Even the people that may be involved in these relationships, if they do start off consensual, still need to be aware there are issues in play.
Every demographic within an employment context needs to be educated and trained. But I am a firm believer, after doing this type of work for many years, that it starts at the top. The person at the top oftentimes creates the culture within the environment. And if the person at the top is not aggressively saying we have zero tolerance for this type of conduct, it's going to get out of control. And the reality is this. I know a lot of people who've been sexually harassed who think if I just wait a little longer, things will get better. And they don't say anything because they know if they say something, wow, now they're going to be the problem in the office. And I can just tell you, this does not get better. It only gets worse. So if you are somebody who is being sexually harassed, again, talk to a lawyer, get your options, so at least you can make some decisions that are best for you and that protect you.
And there's, as to what Boz was just saying, I was involved in a matter where we were able to establish a culture of promiscuity. So if the bosses or the employer is having orgies or sleeping with this one or that one, or, you know, good old boy jokes and, you know, slapping females on the rear or whatever it might be, all of a sudden when that happens with somebody else, they feel like, well, this is what I've got to do because I got to fit in with the boys or whatever. No, that's a culture of promiscuity that starts from the top, and there's actions, there's damages that can be attached to that for allowing that culture to be pervasive within the workplace.
It's a great discussion. It reminds me so much of what we talked about bullying, because the imbalance of power and a lot of the same themes of, hey, this used to be okay. We used to, it's in boys being boys. Those things are not okay anymore. And
well, they've never been okay.
Yeah.
It's just we're finally saying, wait a minute, enough's enough, and it's the role of lawyers to step in and aid and walk alongside of these employees to help them put an end to this.
Fantastic point. Thank you, Boz. Thank you, Mark. Okay, if you'd like to see more of this segment or any of our other law talks, visit our website at wftv.com/legal or join us each week right here on Facebook. I'm Christopher Heath, and thanks for watching.
WFTV's Law Talk was brought courtesy of the Personal Injury and Accident Division of NeJame Law.